Welcome to a new episode of InFocus with Ejaz. Not surprisingly, I am again going to discuss the illegal armed aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran by the Zionist entity and the United States. But first, a word about this program. It is supported by the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research, which is an autonomous policy research center housed in the University of Lahore, and it tackles issues that impact contemporary security and strategic developments. This program is part of that effort. Now, we've had a series of programs. I think, if I remember correctly, this is going to be the sixth one, in which we've been discussing the various facets of what's going on and how might this pan out. But this one is more specifically, or shall I say, more sort of narrowly focused on Iran's nuclear program. The ostensible reason for the attack, well, actually, there are a number of reasons. This is a war that's now desperately looking for a strategy. But anyway, one of the reasons is Iran's nuclear program. But few people outside the nuclear club know or remember that Iran's nuclear program was born of American cooperation in the late 1950s. This was under the Atoms for Peace initiative. It was the US that supplied the Tehran research reactor to then monarch, later ousted in the revolution, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Iran ratified the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970 as a non-nuclear weapon state, and it committed its program to peaceful purposes. And the 1979 Islamic Revolution temporarily suspended those ambitions, but the foundational infrastructure remained. So, what exactly happened? The controversy erupted in August 2002 when Western intelligence services and also an Iranian opposition group revealed the existence of what they described as a secret nuclear facility at Natanz. This disclosure triggered a cascade of suspicions. If Iran's program was genuinely peaceful, why was it being hidden? A 2011 International Atomic Energy Agency report collating broadly credible intelligence concluded that Iran had carried out activities relevant to the development of a nuclear explosive device at least until 2003. So from that moment, Iran's nuclear file became the central axis of its confrontation with the West. In reality, Iran has pursued latency, the technical capacity to produce a weapon quickly without actually doing so. And this is both a technological hedge, or has been a technological hedge, and a diplomatic bargaining chip. So essentially what I'm saying is that the strategy was to create enough leverage to negotiate sanctions relief, much as North Korea used its nuclear status to extract concessions. And this was, in fact, the logic that animated the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, under which Iran accepted strict limits on enrichment in exchange for sanctions. And for a brief period, it appeared that latency had delivered its promised return. But the strategy, well, hindsight is 2020, seemed to contain a flaw. It assumed that as a threshold state, it would be treated as a negotiating partner rather than a target. More broadly, Iran has a three-pillar security doctrine. One is nuclear latency that we just talked about. Then you've got the missile forces and the regional influence. The longhand strategy, or the forward defense strategy, as variously called. Last year, before it was attacked, and again this year before it was attacked, Tehran was being asked to give up on these three pillars. And Iran's position was more circumscribed. It signaled willingness to limit enrichment temporarily, reduce stockpiles, and accept international monitoring in exchange for sanctions. But, and this but is very important, because on this now hinges the future of possible second round of talks in Islamabad. Missile forces and regional relationships were not on the table, and they're still not on the table. The most consequential dynamic may now be unfolding. Military strikes on a threshold state may produce the opposite of their intended effect. Anyway, cut a long story short, and to discuss Iran's nuclear program and what might lie ahead, I have with me Dr. Sina Azodi. He's Assistant Professor of Middle East Politics as well as Director of the Middle East Studies MA program at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. He's also the author of the book Iran and the Bomb, the United States, Iran and the Nuclear Question, which essentially makes him absolutely appropriate for this program. With him is Dr. Tariq Rauf, an internationally respected authority on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation issues. He's got a very long CV. I'm just going to give you the short version of it. From 2002 and 2011, he was head of the Verification and Security Policy Coordination Office at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Reported to the Director General, in which capacity he dealt with high priority verification cases involving Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea, South Korea, and Syria, and was also coordinator of multilateral approaches to the nuclear fuel cycle from 2003 until 2012. Finally, but certainly not least, I have with me Dr. Ludovica Castelli, project manager within the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium. She's based at the, let me try and pronounce it correctly, Istituto Affari Internazionali, IAEA, and is the incoming postdoctoral fellow in the project on managing the atom at the Belfort Center, Harvard. She's co-author of the book, The Global Third Nuclear Age, and is currently working on a first monograph based on her doctoral thesis. So welcome to everyone. Let me begin with Sina, whose book deals with this issue. What do you make of this? I mean, am I correct in assuming that, you know, this whole thing about moving enrichment stage by stage further up, more a bargaining chip, also a technology demonstrator rather than making a beeline for the bomb itself?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's good to be with everybody. And my answer is yes. In the book, one of the things that I explained and I found out in my research is that the Iranian side had learned that the American side and the European side will not take Iran seriously and will not look at Iran as an equal negotiating partner. So what they learned is that they can use the enrichment capacity and expansion of the nuclear program as a bargaining chip to expand Iran's relations, improve relations with the West, and even get concessions in non-nuclear fields such as security cooperation, trade, and commerce. So, and it worked pretty well in the years leading to the signing of JCPOA, and Iranians were able to use that bargaining chip quite effectively to get concessions in other fields. But as I explained it in the book, from the period from 2021 to 2024, they overplayed their hand, they overplayed their enrichment capacity, and that expansion of the nuclear program actually became, first, one of the impediments to getting a deal or restoring the JCPOA, and second, it later became an excuse or a justification for the Israelis and the American side to attack Iran.
Okay, I have certain follow-up questions, but let me make the round here, and then I'll get back to you on what you've said. Tariq, you were in the middle of this, like, you know all the intricacies of what was going on, what were the reports, who was saying what, intelligence, what kind of intelligence, whether that intelligence was doctored, whether that intelligence had a slant. You and I have had this discussion before also, but since memories are short and fickle, I think it'll be important to see, focusing on Iran, what exactly was going on.
So I will take a slightly different tack. So as you mentioned, it was in August of 2002 that the Mujahideen Khalq did this press conference in Washington and exposed that Iran was carrying out clandestine uranium enrichment activity at a location called Natanz. So at this time, the Iranian Foreign Ministry really was also kept in the dark by the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. And it took nearly a year for the Foreign Ministry to pry out of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran the real details. I myself led a couple of delegations where the Foreign Ministry was still struggling to get a handle on what exactly their counterparts at the AEOI were doing. Eventually, at the level of the highest levels of intervention and pressure, they got that information. So in 2003, at the suggestion of the IAEA Director General at that time, Al-Baradei, and the three Europeans, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, Iran agreed to suspend uranium enrichment in exchange for some sanctions relief. That sanctions relief really didn't happen at the level that Iran was expecting because many Western businesses were reluctant and were afraid of secondary sanctions from the United States. So fast forward to 2006. In the meantime, in September 2005, IAEA Board of Governors makes a finding of non-compliance by Iran with its NPT Safeguards Agreement, but the finding of non-alliance or non-compliance related to, as you had mentioned, breaches and failures by Iran under its NPT Safeguards Agreement, as reported by the Director General in his June 2003 report. So this was a backward-looking non-compliance, not current non-compliance. And so under the IAEA statute, the IAEA Board of Governors and the Director General are required to report the non-compliance to the Security Council. This is not a referral, it's a reporting. Action still remains in Vienna. So they said, okay, we will not report you to the Security Council if you take corrective measures. But then with the election of Ahmadinejad as president in 2006 March, he broke out of the suspension. And that is where Iran was then reported to the Security Council, and then the Security Council resolutions started. I will sort of fast forward since we don't have that much time. In my view, Iran's actions upping the ante on enrichment were more as part of its strategy of maximum resistance and punishment, because each of these reactions or each of these actions was a reaction to either sanctions increase, assassination of scientists, sabotages of enrichment facilities, and so on. And in each case, they gave the IAEA advance notice that in a month or a week from now, we are going to increase enrichment or we're going to add new centrifuges. So from the NPT safeguards point of view, Iran remained within its legal obligations, but it slowly peeled back the JCPOA restrictions that it had accepted, going until the very recent times. And the latest one was going up to 60%. This was in retaliation for assassination and also sabotage as well. So it's partly right, it's also negotiating, but from their point of view, you up the ante by taking a provocative action. Only way I can punish you, this is my reading, is by increasing my enrichment level, which gives you more angst, and therefore you would come to the bargaining table. Finally, in November of 2024, through the good offices of Egypt in Cairo, Iran and the IAEA agreed that Iran would continue 60%, but would no longer accumulate 60%, and they would recycle it. And at that time, the monthly production was about 7 kilograms of 60% per month. But then there was another provocation, another resolution adopted by the board. So Iran then stepped out of the Cairo agreement. And this is where I believe they made a big mistake. They quadrupled the monthly production from 7 kilograms to about 34 kilograms per month. And that is where the alarm bell started ringing, and it empowered the Israeli president to finally get his prime minister to finally get his way with the US to launch the action in June of last year.
Okay, this is very interesting that both Sina and you have essentially struck one point, which is overplaying the hand, and I will get to that because there's a lot of this, going back into history about the Four Peninsula overplaying. By 1986, the Iran-Iraq war should have ended, but the Iranians decided that they are now going to push the Iraqis out and actually capture territory within Iraq, and that kind of prolong the war. That reminds me of Clausewitz chapter 6 and 7, Defense and Attack, where he says the excellence of a commander lies in understanding the culminating point of victory. But let me bring in Ludovica here. So, Ludovica, so we have two tracks in terms of the Iranian nuclear program. So, one track has to do with the IAEA and by extrapolation, the United Nations. But then there is another track, which is the Western intelligence agencies and the Zionist entity, and Netanyahu, who has been, crying wolf for the last 40 years. And we have lots of evidence that they were trying to push a certain kind of agenda. And we have Iranian nuclear scientists being assassinated, the Stuxnet virus being introduced into Natanz, a number of other covert activities, which obviously got Iran to push back. I want to find out from your research, since you have been looking at Iran, how much of these covert, aggressive, hostile acts had an impact on Iran's response, and how much of these acts had a negative impact on the overt legal normative track which was being pursued, namely IAEA and by extrapolation the United Nations.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, it's no secret, of course, that Israel never really liked Iranian peaceful nuclear program. I mean, it didn't have to become, a nuclear latency for them not to like it. They didn't like it from the beginning when it was, when incorporated since the very beginning, this interest in having a domestic capacity for enriching uranium. So, and this was, it's been very explicit since the very beginning. We've seen the Israelis, with to some extent the U.S. support over the past decades, intervening in many ways. Sometimes there were more, let's say, kinetic, of course, episodes, and this took the form of, as you said, assassination and cyber attacks, but even like strikes. We've seen strikes even before June 2025, surgically strikes. But then there was also the other part of it, in which during the negotiations before the JCPOA, the different negotiations that we had before the JCPOA, and then in between after the withdrawal, when the Biden administration was trying to resurrect, the diplomatic talks with Iran, we have seen a lot of lobbying actions from the Israeli side in the US, but also in Israel, that tried to influence profoundly the objective of the diplomatic negotiations. And that was very, very explicit in 2010, 2011, 2012, in which the Israelis were also explicitly talking about striking Iran. There was this counter-proliferation narrative that was very strong. Netanyahu had been saying this very explicitly many times, but then within the US, in those circles, there was a very strong influence when it came to the diplomatic effort that the US was trying to work on for the Iranian nuclear crisis. So all these efforts, from the kinetic ones to the more, anti-diplomatic ones, basically brought to Iran having, a more, let's say, aggressive or provocative stance within the negotiations, but also outside of it. And the IAEA became also some sort of a site that became increasingly politicized, or at least from the Iranian eyes, they've been increasingly seeing the IAEA being constantly politicized, or being at the center, or we could say a victim of the process of politicization. And this, of course, had a very severe consequences when Iran was approaching the agency for verification, inspection, and all those activities that the IAEA had to implement within the comprehensive safeguards agreement and so on and so forth. There was a trust between the agents and Iran, and this trust problem increased and increased. And I guess a really important part was also this role that Israel and to some extent the U.S. had with kinetic action and this aggressive anti-diplomatic action.
Yeah, I'm actually very happy that you talked about the IAEA politicization, because Iran openly accused Grossi of essentially pushing the Zionist agenda. I have to make a clarification. I do not refer to Israel as Israel, because we don't recognize the state. We recognize it as occupied Palestine, so we refer to it as the Zionist entity. As far as we are concerned, there is no state of Israel. So I just thought, for the sake of the conversation, that I must have this clarification.
Can I come in on this politicization aspect?
Yeah, certainly. I wanted to go to Sina, but yeah, do, because you were there, and yeah. So go ahead, Tariq.
No, go to Sina, then I'll come after that.
Okay. So Sina, again, basically my question about Iran's responses. I understand you talked about Iran overplaying its hand, but just to if I were to put myself in the shoes of a policymaker in Tehran, I would think that, given the kind of pressure that Iran was under, not just sanctions but also covert hostile acts, Iran was not just acting but also reacting to that situation. I'd probably cut them some slack. That's my view, and I would like to get your view on that. But also, the other related question is, now that a lot of water has run down the Shatul Ard, do you think that the nuclear file can be reopened again from where it was closed last year, or even this year, just before the war?
When I say they overplayed their hands, what I mean is that, and I agree with Tariq, that there was a lot of miscommunication and rather deliberate hiding of information from the AEOI to the Iranian Foreign Ministry and the Supreme National Security Council, and I actually cite them. But when I say overplaying their hands, is that negotiations to restore the JCPOA, because they thought that the American side and the European side, they're desperate for an agreement with Iran. And you can see it in the rhetoric that came from Tehran, including voices who said that there will be a cold winter coming from Europe, in Europe. We are patient, and they thought that by prolonging the negotiations and expanding the program, they can get better concessions. And this was despite the fact that both the American side and the European side were telling Iranians, this is the best deal that you can get. Iranians miscalculated in the talks to restore the JCPOA. And then we had two important incidents that really put the negotiations to the side. One was the invasion of Ukraine, and second was the protest that erupted in Iran in September of 2022, the killing of Mahsa Amini. Those resulted in the nuclear file being put to the side, and the American side and the European side were not willing to talk to Iranians anymore, let alone give them sanctions relief. This is why I say that Iranians miscalculated and overplayed their bargaining chips, which was the expansion of the nuclear program. Now, can the nuclear file be reopened? I think that look, the debate over Iran's nuclear program has occupied 7 American presidents, from President Ford all the way to Donald Trump. And I don't think that it's going anywhere. All these people who say that the Iranian nuclear program is a relic now, it's not going to be there anymore, I think they're mistaken. Iranians tend to think in longer terms, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And once Donald Trump leaves office, there's a very good chance that Iranians will try to restore and reconstruct the enrichment capacity, because as I always say, you cannot bomb the capacity and the knowledge that Iranians have gained over the past 2 decades. So if the question is, will the nuclear file be reopened? Absolutely, I think yes.
Yes. My own sense is that, if you're looking for security guarantees, the ultimate security guarantee after all this is for you to make a beeline for the weapon, because as a threshold state, as I said in my opening, as a threshold state, latency is actually invited aggression rather than, being helpful to Iran as far as negotiations are concerned. But we'll get back to that again. Tariq, go ahead. You wanted to talk about the politicization of the IAEA.
Yes, I'll come to that, but we again need to peel back a little bit. So in your introduction, Ejaz, you pointed to the IAEA's report of November of 2011, which raised these 12 areas of so-called possible military dimensions. And that information was obtained by German intelligence through Iranian nuclear scientists, and then shared with the US and so on, and filtered back into the IAEA. So I was also there at that time, and there was a lot of skepticism in some part of the IAEA Secretariat about the veracity of this information, because the IAEA is not in a position to independently verify and corroborate intelligence information, because it doesn't have spies, it doesn't have satellites, and so on. It needs to use other information to corroborate what states are providing. And also, the countries that were providing intelligence information, quote unquote, to the IAEA made it a condition that the original information provided to the IAEA could not be shared with Iran. So Iran would always get a second-hand version of the allegations. And so this also created some distrust between Iran and the IAEA. But under the IAEA system, if a member state comes with a brown envelope and says, here's some information against country X, and don't show it to them, IAEA is obligated to maintain that confidentiality. So then when the JCPOA was agreed on the 15th of July 2015, there was also a parallel agreement between the IAEA and Iran called the Plan of Action, Joint Plan of Action, under which the IAEA was instructed to close these 12 PMD issues by the 15th of December. And Secretary Kerry made a press conference on the 15th of July 2015 here in Vienna. And he said, we know what Iran was doing. They stopped their program in 2003. Some activities continued for a few years later. But that is the chapter closed. We are no longer looking backwards. We are looking forward. And this is what the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is bringing to the table: the daily inspections, 3.67 enrichment level, maximum 3,000 kilograms of stockpile, etc., etc. And but the JCPOA could not come into effect until the PMD was resolved. So on the 2nd of December 2015, the then IAEA Director General, the late Yukiya Amano, issued a report which closed the 12 issues. But since the issues were opened politically in 2011 by the same Director General, they were also closed politically in 2012 untidily. So then we have Resolution 2231 adopted in January 2016, and the JCPOA comes into effect. And the IAEA is reporting that Iran is living up to its obligations, daily inspections at Natanz pilot plant, fuel enrichment plant, and the Fordo enrichment plant, also Esfahan and elsewhere. But then in 2018, the Israelis claimed to have pulled off this great big paper, and that they purloined about 500,000 documents from this storage facility in Turkuzabad. So that information was then handed over to the United States. And this is where artificial intelligence comes in. The big language models like Palantir and others were set loose on these files. And this also gave to the IAEA some guidance as to what questions to ask and where to go in Iran. So this started poisoning the relationship between Iran and the IAEA because these issues didn't relate to JCPOA. These issues related to Iran's compliance with the Safeguards Agreement, undeclared activities at 3 locations, and storage of material at the 4th location. So those 4 issues still remain unresolved, and they are NPT issues. They are not JCPOA issues, so we need to separate them. Also, we need to separate the IAEA as well. There is the Board of Governors, which is 35 member states. 20 or 20 plus are Western and Western dominated. So every resolution against Iran has been adopted by a vote of 20 in favor, 3 or 4 against, and the rest abstaining. So we need to make this distinction between the IAEA Secretariat and the Director General and the Board of Governors. So the IAEA Director General and the Secretariat have tried their best to keep it at a technical level. The frustration of Iran comes at the political level from the board. And if you sit in a board meeting, you will hear 2 different universes. The West will come up with a litany of failures and complaints against Iran, and the other side will talk about how Iran is cooperating. And so the relationship now is completely destroyed, although, as I mentioned, in Cairo in 2024, Iran agreed with the IAEA on certain measures. They also agreed last year as well. Before the bombing in June, they also agreed to another set of measures with the IAEA. So they have a mixed relationship with the IAEA, but after the bombing, the relationship has become really quite corrosive, unfortunately.
Yeah. You know, these intelligence reports, I'm sure all of you would remember, the German intelligence, BND, had this source, which was codenamed Curveball, Rafid al-Janabi, who was an Iraqi defector. And he somehow, concocted all these these stories about the Iraqi WMD, especially chem bio weapons. And the BND lapped it up and then essentially handed him, that entire thing to the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Central Intelligence Agency never bothered to vet.
No, these are 2 different things, Ejaz. Curveball was Iraq.
Yeah, I know. I'm talking about Iraqi defector. I'm just saying that these intelligence reports, when they try to make a case against a country, I mean, we also know of the dossier that the MI6 came up with. We also know how GCHQ and the NSA were, hand in glove with reference to Iraq, all of that. So, yeah, so I'm kind of skeptical. I should be forgiven for being skeptical about these intelligence reports. But Ludovica, again, I won't get your take on how you think Iran is going to play this here on out, because it was negotiating last year, and it was attacked in the middle of those negotiations. It was again negotiating this year, and it was attacked while the negotiations were going on. And one more, and I guess very important point this year was that a day before the attack, the Omani foreign minister, Badr al-Busaidi, was in the US. He met with the US VP, J.D. Vance. He came on a US TV channel, talked about the sort of concessions that Iran had made, and said that they were even more than what Iran had conceded to in the JCPOA. So, having done that, having conceded all those, and then having been aggressed against, do you think Iran is now going to go back to those concessions, or do you think Iran is going to take a completely different track altogether?
Well, first of all, I think it must be said that the Iranian policymakers are sitting at the table, so they're still open to some sort of nuclear negotiations, and they're meeting with counterparts. And this is a lot after everything that you've been saying, right? Being attacked during negotiations twice. But there is a conversation, there is a dialogue that is going on, and this is a really good thing. Now, as we're hearing, like so far, in terms of the points that both the U.S. and Iran have been proposing for a future deal. I mean, we already. I think our impression was pretty clear that it was very hard to get to a deal that was that could be acceptable for both sides. The U.S. proposal is still including the no enrichment for 20 years, or at least this was the latest. The latest news, and this of course doesn't make for a robust nuclear deal or even a possible nuclear deal that the Iranians have been saying for since the 60s, that they or at least the 70s, when the negotiations between, of course, Nixon, Ford, and the Shah were ongoing, that they didn't want to renounce to their enrichment capacities, and this of course this narrow focus from the side on enriched uranium stocks while neglecting equally important issues like the future enrichment capacity or the verification mechanisms or alternative pathways, because I mean we have to think about also the plutonium pathway, which could be an issue in the future. We've been there right before. So a temporary moratorium combined with stockpile reductions might buy time, of course, but without strong verification and long-term constraints, it would be a very fragile solution, and arguably weaker than the JCPOA itself. Um, if, and this is a big if, a future agreement were to combine a moratorium with stockpile reductions and restore, and this is the biggest thing, extensive IAEA access, at minimum through the CSA and additional protocol, and impose meaningful limits on the enrichment capacity, then we would be looking at something that is more credible and more sustainable in the future. So the elements of a viable deal are not mysterious. We've seen them before. The real challenge now is whether political conditions exist to put them back together again. But again, it's a really good signal that there is a conversation going on.
Yeah, it's always good to have a conversation, and I hope that this goes somewhere, because frankly, us Pakistanis are in the middle of it, and we have been escorting delegations, coming in and going out. But Sina, one of the reasons that I am stressing this point has to do with something very subtle that's been happening. And in some ways, it is also positive. In some ways, it might not be very positive. And that is that the decapitation strikes have martyred some of the most experienced leaders, post a revolution, who were part of the revolution, and after the revolution, who were part of the Iran-Iraq war, who have gone through the ups and downs for all these decades. And we now have a younger leadership, or a relatively younger leadership. And we also have the current supreme leader. It seems to me, I might be completely wrong, but it seems to me that the levers of power and decision-making are more with the IRGC than the younger Khamenei. So that is one thing. And the other thing is that the Lego animations that we have seen, and to be very honest, I have been saying this to my friends here, that as far as sophisticated, high-grade trolling goes, Iranians get the Pulitzer for that. And so these Lego animations are coming from the younger generation, not particularly religiously ideologically motivated, but nationalistically ideologically motivated. And it seems to me that once this war, is kind of, it has petered out, that there might be a better reconciliation between the religiously motivated and the nationalistically motivated Iranians. And Iran might just emerge more consolidated internally than it was just before the war.
I think so too. And by the way, these animations are fascinating.
Absolutely.
It is produced definitely by a team of tech savvy younger people who may not necessarily be ideologically driven, but they're very good at their jobs. And I think they're very interesting. And the trolling also of the official accounts of the Iranian embassies abroad, the one in Hyderabad, for example, in South Africa, they're very good. This is definitely by, as I said, a team of experts who know what they're doing. Now, the effect of the ascendance of a younger generation is that, especially in the case of the younger Khamenei, Mojtaba, is that in the case of Mojtaba specifically, he is influenced by the IRGC and the military people, and so he is the front man. He nominally holds the ultimate power. He's the commander in chief, but at least for a period of time until he socializes into his new job, IRGC will have, and the military people will have the most power in the country. Now, whether it will change in the future or not, that's a separate issue. I don't know, but I've always when I was asked about the future of Iran when Khamenei, the senior, left the scene, I was my more forecast was that there will be a hostile takeover of the institutions, the decision-making institutions. I did not foresee this war coming a couple of years ago, but we are now seeing that thanks to this war, IRGC has had a hostile takeover. It is in every institution of decision making, and I think they've become more powerful. One more thing I say about the IRGC: the the previous generation of IRGC were all veterans of the Iran-Iraq war. They experienced that trauma, the use of chemical weapons, etc., etc. But this generation is a veteran of the Syrian theater, which all pushed on the narrative of resistance, of fighting with proxy groups, etc., etc. So I think there is a fundamental shift in the strategic thinking of this generation.
Absolutely. Anyway, I also have to close the program. Tariq, any final thoughts with reference to the nuclear file and what might you expect in terms of? I mean, the Iranians have said that they are prepared to downblend the 440 kg, 60% enriched uranium, but they are not prepared to let go of the right to enrichment, which is there in Article 4 of the NPT, read in conjunction with Articles 1 and 2 of the NPT. They're not prepared to do that. Do you think they could possibly concede that? I mean, from where I stand, I don't think that's going to happen. But I do believe that they would probably downblend, and there may be a sunset clause on that in terms of how much stockpiling they can do, just like there were sunset
Yeah.
clauses in JCPOA.
Well, the offer that Iranians had made to the American side in Geneva right before the U.S. attacked Iran was a zero stockpile of uranium, of enriched uranium on Iranian soil. which made it impossible for Iran to develop nuclear weapons. And that was a better deal compared to the JCPOA, at least for the American side. Now, and I agree with you that Iran will not give up on the principle of enrichment. They can accept, and from what we were seeing in the media and public reporting, is that they will be open to a moratorium or a suspension of enrichment, but they will not give up on the right to enrich. And this is something that goes back to decades ago, even under the Shah, which again points me into the direction of this continuity in Iran's nuclear thinking.
Correct. Tariq?
Yeah. So first of all, Biden was never serious about returning to the JCPOA.
Correct.
This was an Obama deal. Here is this young pipsqueak who comes out of nowhere, becomes president, gets reelected, treats me as vice president, not with the respect that I expected. And therefore, he was not going to expend his political capital to go back into the JCPOA. And in my view, the US never really was serious. They actually put more sanctions on Iran under the Biden administration. And the EU was completely toothless, particularly the three. They were completely paralyzed. They really didn't know, where they were coming or going. So it was a huge, big mess, and this really created the situation where we are today. One point, Iran never had a plutonium route. The mixed facility, molybdenum, iron, xenon facility, never had any hot cells that were working. So right from the very beginning, every IAEA report says that there was no plutonium route. It was only highly enriched uranium. And this is one of the reasons why Iran was able to get the centrifuges originally to start the enrichment program. If they would have had to buy the processing technology from France, which they were interested in at one point, when they invested $1 billion at that time in the Eurodiff facility with France, but under US pressure, that was cancelled. So now, if you look at the statements coming out of the Iranian mission in Vienna for the past year and a half, they are very well argued. So obviously, they have a very well-trained young diplomat in international nuclear law. The English is perfect, the logic is perfect, and they are very well structured compared to previous statements, which were all over the place, and they were more political rather than substantive. Now, if you look at the letters going to the Secretary General of the UN regarding the current situation, they're very professionally argued, very much grounded in international law, and making a strong case for Iran. In order to downblend, Iran will need to restart centrifuges. You need centrifuges to reintroduce the highly enriched uranium and to downblend it. It's much more difficult to do it otherwise. I mean, fuel fabricators also downblend, but you then need to mix low enriched uranium with higher enriched uranium to lower the overall enrichment level. So it means Iran will need to restart some level of uranium enrichment if downblending is to take place. In 2015, that HEU stockpile was removed and taken over by Russia. Russia, given the current situation with Washington a couple of years ago, already refused that in any new agreement, they were not going to take away HEU out of Iran. This was their way of strengthening the Iranian position. So, first of all, if there is a new deal and quote unquote Iran's right to enrich is recognized, it's interesting that yesterday I heard Secretary John Perry on BBC saying Iran has a right to enrich, which is not the official US position, because the day before, Secretary Blinken said there's no right to enrich, but we understand Iran was enriching, and so we let them enrich, and this might be the new way forward. So at the moment, there is still a lot of confusion about what remains. Whether for more than 5 years, IAEA was not verifying the production of centrifuges at Isfahan. This was also one of the actions Iran took in response to assassinations and sabotages. So, is there a secret stockpile of centrifuges somewhere? We don't know. I doubt it, because Iran's nuclear program, as we can see, and political system has been so thoroughly penetrated by Iranian intelligence agencies that we would have known by now if there was a secret program. So I think what Iran wants to do is to resurrect the small capability and wait for a time when they might have a different calculus. And also, I think it's a matter of pride. They've paid a very heavy price over the last quarter century for their enrichment program. This is a point Western countries that impose sanctions don't recognize. When you impose sanctions, you raise the cost to yourself for a future deal. Because it's not the leaders that will suffer, it's the population that suffers. Because of sanctions, Iran could not get COVID medicine. Because of sanctions, Iran's Tehran research reactor could not be refueled for a while. 100,000 cancer patients died because they couldn't get cancer therapy. So this is the burden of sanctions which nobody talks about. We talk about sanctions as these are things on paper. So I call them also crimes against humanity. Therefore, the US and the EU need to shoulder this responsibility, and I would like the Iranians to bring this cost up much more openly than they have done so before. And we have normalized this discussion of nuclear weapons, nuclear deterrence, collateral damage, mowing the lawn every day.
Yeah.
Even under the Gaza ceasefire, the Israelis are killing Gaza. They're killing.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think this what the West considers Iran's obsession with enrichment. I think it kind of represents sovereignty, technological modernity, also resistance to Western domination. So I don't think Iran is going to let go of that. But I'll give the last word to Ludovica. Any thoughts, Ludovica, with reference to how it's going to pan out from here on out in terms of negotiations on the nuclear file? You're optimistic about the fact that the conversation is happening. Let's hope that optimism is not misplaced. We all have that optimism, but you think Iran will accept downblending? I mean, what Badr al-Bussetti said, the concessions that Iran had made. Do you think Iran is likely to go back to that, or maybe not?
Well, I mean, as I said before, and I mean, just to clarify, I never said that there was a reprocessing capability in Iran. That was never it was never there. I just said that it's something, of course, that in history we've had cases in which countries have switched at some point pathway, and this is something to think about in any sort of negotiation. But I think a realistic deal is probably not a maximalist one, and from what it appears from the U.S. position, I mean, the U.S. position is still very maximalist when it comes to enrichment. So it is unlikely that the current environment will produce a comprehensive and once-for-all solution in which every concern disappears. A more realistic objective would be to rebuild, well, first of all, a verified baseline, because right now there's a very big problem, which is the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency. We don't really know where some of these elements we've been talking about are. So restore inspections, account for stockpiles, and of course constrain the reconstitution. That is highly relevant now because the technical environment is much harder. The trust deficit is much deeper, and the politics in Tehran, as Sina has said before, are probably more rigid than before for many reasons. And we've said before, the JCPOA succeeded temporarily when it did, not because it stripped the program of its meaning, but because on some extent it allowed restraint to be narrated as dignity preserving and recognition affirming, rather than humiliating. That was a central part of it, and recognition matters as much as tensions relief. And this is also important now, I think. So a deal will not work right now if it is framed purely as coercive roadblock. It would only have a chance if it can be narrated inside Iran, inside the US, as something other than capitulation or something like that. So that would be my bottom line.
No, absolutely. One of the problems up until now has been that the Americans haven't really been negotiating. They have been bringing in demands, and they've been wanting Iran to basically sign off of that, and that didn't happen. That's not going to happen. especially not after this war. But thank you so much, Doctors Ludovica, Castelli.
Can I come in on the? I wanted to build on a good point that Ludovica raised. This is about restoring the nuclear material balance. This is something that I discussed in my article in Arms Control Today of November of last year. So the people who bombed were not thinking the day after the bombing, how is one going to account for the 440 kilograms of 60% and the roughly 8,000 kilograms of other nuclear material. So these sites have been bombed. Some of these cylinders will have been destroyed. So the UF6 in normal state is not a gas. It's a solid. It's a powder. This will have mixed with debris. It will be impossible to recover it. One of the massive ordnance penetrators dropped on the towns apparently did not explode. So you have a charge of 2,000 plus kilograms of high explosives sitting there unexploded. So one will need miners and others, first of all, to excavate the sites, to go down where the centrifuges were, where the nuclear material was, see what the situation is. Only then can IAEA inspectors go in. And in my view, it will be impossible now to account for the 440 kilograms or whatever, unless they are hidden somewhere which was not bombed.
Well, some evidence is that the Iranians have already taken that out, so it might be somewhere else and not under the debris. But your points with reference to unexploded ordnance or various other aspects of it is really apt. But thank you so much, Doctors Ludovica Castelli, Sina Azodi, Tariq Rauf. This is all from this episode. If you like the discussion, click on the subscribe button, send us comments. Until next time, stay safe and good.